Welcome to Back, Mystic Empires. What if I told you the most fearsome empire of the Bronze Age has been almost entirely erased from history? And what if their greatest secret to power wasn't just their weapons, but a revolutionary idea that changed the world forever? Welcome, seekers of wisdom, to Mystic Empires. Today, we journey back over 3,000 years, to a time of dust, bronze, and thunder. To the age of the Hittites, the forgotten masters of war. In the rugged, windswept plateaus of Anatolia, in what is now modern-day Turkey, a kingdom rose from the shadows of obscurity. This was not the fertile crescent of the Egyptians, with its life-giving Nile. This was not the lush river valleys of Mesopotamia. This was a harsh, mountainous land, where survival was a daily battle against the elements. And from this crucible of hardship, the Hittites forged an empire of such staggering power and sophistication that it would dominate the ancient world for centuries. Yet, for a long time, we knew almost nothing about them. Their cities were lost, their stories silenced, their very name was little more than a cryptic footnote in the Bible. While the glory of Egypt and the legends of Babylon echoed through the ages, the Hittites were a ghost, a whisper on the wind. But then, the archaeologists came. The linguists, the historians. With painstaking care, they began to peel back the layers of time. And what they found in the ruins of Hattusa, the Hittite capital, was nothing short of a miracle. They found libraries, not mere collections of scrolls, but vast archives of thousands of clay tablets, meticulously inscribed with a complex script we now call cuneiform. And when we finally learned to read their words, the silence was broken. The ghosts began to speak, and they told us a story more epic, more inspiring, and more consequential than we could have ever imagined. This is not just a story of conquest. It is a story of resilience. It is a story of innovation. It is, above all, a story about the power of an idea. Our story begins with a people on the move. The Hittites were not native to Anatolia. They were Indo-Europeans, a migratory people who swept into the region, bringing with them their language, their gods, and their unmatched skill with the chariot. They found a land of small, warring city-states, and they saw an opportunity. Under a king named Labarna, they began the arduous process of unification. But it was under his successors, particularly a line of powerful monarchs, that the Hittite identity truly crystallized. They built their capital, Hattusa, into an impregnable fortress city. Perched on a rocky mountainside, surrounded by monumental walls that seemed to grow from the very stone itself, Hattusa was a statement of intent. It declared to the world, "We are here. We are strong, and we are here to stay." But strength alone does not build a lasting empire. The Hittites faced a problem that has plagued conquerors throughout history. How do you control diverse, conquered peoples? How do you manage a sprawling, multi-ethnic realm without it fracturing into 1,000 pieces? The Egyptians often did it with sheer, unrelenting force and the deification of their pharaoh. The Assyrians would later do it with a policy of calculated terror. The Hittites, they chose a different path. A more difficult path, but ultimately, a more brilliant one. They chose the path of inclusion. This was their first great innovation, the bedrock of their power. When the Hittites conquered a new territory, they did not simply loot it, enslave its population, and install a brutal governor. Instead, they often made the local rulers into vassal kings, bound to the Hittite great king by solemn treaties. These weren't just dictates of surrender, they were complex legal documents, spelling out mutual obligations. The vassal would provide troops and tribute. In return, the Hittite king would guarantee their protection, their right to rule their own people, and even their succession. The local gods of the conquered people were often incorporated into the Hittite pantheon. It was a system based not just on fear, but on loyalty and mutual benefit. They understood that an empire held together by shared interest is far stronger than one held together by chains alone. Think about the power of that idea, 3,000 years ago. They were building a commonwealth. Now, let's talk about the thing they are most famous for, war. The title of this video calls them Masters of War, and that is no exaggeration. But their mastery was not just in brute strength, it was in technological and tactical genius. Their signature weapon was the chariot. But the Hittite chariot was different. While the Egyptians used lighter, faster chariots for mobile archery, the Hittite war machine was a heavy, sledgehammer blow. Their chariots were larger, sturdier, and carried 3 men: a driver, a shield-bearer, and most importantly, a spearman. On the battlefield, these chariots didn't just skirmish, they charged. They were the ancient equivalent of a tank division, designed to smash through enemy lines, creating chaos and breaking formations. And then there was the weapon that gave them an almost mythical advantage: iron. In the Bronze Age, the world fought with weapons made of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Bronze is a good metal, but it's soft. It can bend. It can break. It is expensive. The Hittites, sitting on rich deposits of iron ore, pioneered the large-scale production of iron weapons. Iron is harder. It holds a sharper edge. An iron sword could shatter a bronze one. For a time, the Hittites held a virtual monopoly on this technology, and they guarded it as a state secret. To their enemies, a Hittite army glinting not with the dull gold of bronze, but with the dark, deadly gray of iron, must have been a terrifying sight. It was the cutting edge of military technology, literally. This combination of strategic inclusion and overwhelming military power reached its zenith in the 13th century BC, under the reign of one of the most formidable monarchs in all of antiquity, Muwatalli II. And it is here that we come to the ultimate test, the clash of titans that would define the Hittite legacy. The stage was set in Syria, at a place called Kadesh. On one side, the young, proud, and phenomenally powerful pharaoh Ramesses II of Egypt, leading the most advanced army in the world. On the other, Muwatalli II and his hardened Hittite legions, with their thousands of heavy chariots and their ironclad resolve. Ramesses, confident of an easy victory, marched his forces headlong into a Hittite trap. Muwatalli had concealed the bulk of his army behind the city of Kadesh. As the Egyptian vanguard began setting up camp, believing the Hittites to be far away, Muwatalli unleashed his chariots across the Orontes River. It was a moment of supreme peril for Ramesses. His army was caught completely by surprise, his divisions separated. The Egyptian camp was on the verge of being overrun. It looked like a total, catastrophic defeat was inevitable. But the Battle of Kadesh is fascinating because both sides claimed victory. Ramesses, in his magnificent propaganda at Abu Simbel and Karnak, portrays himself as a lone hero, a god-king who single-handedly turned the tide against the treacherous Hittites. And he did manage to rally his troops and fight his way to a stalemate. But the cold, hard truth of the outcome is revealed not in Egyptian stone, but in a clay tablet found in the ruins of Hattusa. It is the text of a treaty, the Treaty of Kadesh, and it is this document that reveals the true, enduring greatness of the Hittite Empire. After years of continued stalemate and conflict, Ramesses II and the new Hittite king, Hattusili III, did something almost unthinkable for the time. They negotiated a permanent peace. The Kadesh Peace Treaty is the oldest written peace treaty in the world whose text has survived. A copy resides today at the United Nations headquarters, a timeless symbol of diplomacy over destruction. The treaty established boundaries, non-aggression pacts, and a mutual defense alliance. It even included clauses for the extradition of political refugees. Most importantly, it referred to the Egyptian pharaoh and the Hittite great king as brothers. Let that sink in for a moment. The two superpowers of the Bronze Age, after fighting the largest chariot battle in history, chose not endless war, but lasting peace. They chose mutual respect over annihilation. This was the Hittite way in its highest expression. They were masters of war, yes, but they were also masters of statecraft. They understood that the ultimate victory is not the total destruction of your enemy, but a peace that allows your civilization to prosper and thrive. This treaty held for the rest of the Hittite Empire's existence. There was no more war between them. They had fought to a standstill, and from that standstill, they built a foundation for stability that lasted for a century. This is where the story should reach its happy ending. The Hittite Empire, at the peak of its power, wise, sophisticated, and secure. But history is rarely so kind. Around 1200 BC, a storm swept across the Mediterranean and the Near East. We call it the Late Bronze Age collapse. A perfect storm of calamities. Mysterious invaders, referred to in Egyptian texts as the Sea Peoples, attacked coastlines and disrupted trade routes. There is evidence of widespread drought and famine. Internal rebellions shook the foundations of old kingdoms. One by one, the great empires began to falter. The Mycenaean Greeks fell. The mighty new kingdom of Egypt retreated, crippled. And the Hittite Empire, for all its strength and wisdom, shattered. Hattusa, the magnificent, impregnable capital, was not conquered in a great, final battle. It was abandoned. Its people simply left. They walked away from the libraries, the temples, the palaces, and the towering walls. The city was emptied and left to the elements. The empire fractured into small, Neo-Hittite city-states that lingered for a few more centuries, but the central power was gone. The knowledge of ironworking, once a closely guarded secret, spread as Hittite smiths fled to new lands, inadvertently ending their own monopoly but seeding the coming Iron Age. For centuries, the Hittites vanished from human memory. Their cities became grassy mounds, their language a dead mystery. They became the forgotten in our title. So, what is the lesson of the Hittites? Why does their story, a story that ended in collapse over 3 millennia ago, matter to us today? It matters because their legacy is not one of final failure, but of enduring triumph. The Hittites teach us that true power is multifaceted. It is not just the power to break, but the power to build. It is not just the power to command, but the power to integrate. They built an empire not on a cult of personality, but on a framework of law and treaty. They showed that inclusivity can be a greater source of strength than pure domination. They were innovators in technology, yes, but their greatest innovation was a concept of international relations based on parity and agreement. Their collapse is a humbling reminder of the fragility of even the most powerful civilizations. They fell to forces beyond their control: climate change, mass migration, systemic collapse, echoes of which we hear in our own world today. No wall, no matter how high, no army, no matter how fierce, can ultimately guarantee survival against the tides of history. But here is the final, most inspiring part of their story. They were forgotten, but they were not lost. Through the relentless curiosity of humanity, through our drive to dig into the earth and decipher forgotten languages, we brought them back. We gave them back their voice. The Hittites are forgotten no more. Their story is now a part of our story. Their wisdom, etched in clay and buried in ruins, has been recovered to inspire us. So, the next time you feel that your own efforts are in vain, that the structures you build might not last, remember the Hittites. They built an empire that lasted for centuries, and even when it fell, the seeds they planted, the ideas of lawful treaties, of inclusive governance, of technological progress, sprang to life in ages that came long after them. Your legacy is not always in the stone and mortar of what you build, but in the ideas you champion. It is in the kindness you show, the wisdom you share, the treaties you make in your own life. You may face your own collapses, your own Kadesh-like battles, but remember the Hittite choice: the choice to build, to integrate, to seek peace after the conflict. Be the master of your own empire. Build it not just on strength, but on wisdom. And know that even if shadows fall, your story, like theirs, can be rediscovered and can inspire generations yet to come. This was the story of the Hittites. Thank you for listening. Until next time, seekers of wisdom, this is Mystic Empires.